It's my pleasure now to introduce Jonathan Groom to you. I know many of you will have already met Jonathan, but I'm really pleased that he's agreed to come and speak to us today. As you know, Jonathan is Director and National Head of Jersey's Financial Intelligence Unit, an agency, if you like, that's going under quite a lot of transformation, certainly has done in the last 12 months, and I think continues to do so. Prior to coming to Jersey, Jonathan's held a range of really interesting positions. He was head of the Wolfsberg Group. He was the Director of Intelligence for London 2012 for the Olympics. But also, perhaps lesser known features of Jonathan's career is that he has worked in the private sector, both as a consultant at Deloitte, but also as a very senior individual in the risk world at HSBC, giving him what I think is a pretty unique and balanced perspective on the issue of financial crime as a head of a national financial intelligence unit. So Jonathan, thank you very much for sparing the time. You're most welcome.
Super. Well, thank you, and thank you very much, Stephen, for having me and for the introduction. It is fair to reflect that I'm heading up a national intelligence unit, as such as the FIU. I'm the only global head of an FIU that has both sat at the top of banking as the main reporting entities, but also as a professional intelligence officer as well. And it probably reflects where the FIUs were and necessarily where they're going to. So Stephen has obviously asked me to think about some reflections on my first year in office. Before I start a few slides, the first two things that immediately jump out to me is, one, I spent far too long with George Permain during that year with everything to do with Moneyval. And the other was that we all know that change is constant and persistent, but the challenges of change and the challenges of transformation, I think, have hit home in lots of different ways. But what I wanted to do was structure the next probably half an hour, and then I'm more than happy to sit down with Stephen and take any questions or have any questions that Stephen has. But to think about this from an intelligencer's perspective, and intelligencers always think about the who, what, where, when, why, and how. They are the intelligence questions that you're seeking to understand. So that's where we will go and shape ourselves and perhaps some of my thoughts. But to start off with, the key messages here is that the FIU has and will continue to evolve. And that's actually for your benefit and the jurisdiction's benefit. We're not just doing it because we think it's a good idea to change. That evolution is critical, and it's happening globally with FIUs as well. Collaboration and partnerships are intrinsic for our success going forward. And that means that our relationship with you becomes really, really important, and that we're no longer sat behind a brick wall and you just report stuff into us and we never tell you anything. We have to have a relationship. We have to tell you and help you. We have to be a capability that is there for the benefit of the jurisdiction as a whole, and to help you to understand threats and understand what you should be reporting a degree better. That becomes critical. And also, we need to think as an intelligence capability of the so what for Jersey, and the so what for an international finance center. Because unless we think about the so what to us, we're only taking information from the UK or the Americans or the Canadians or elsewhere, and they've thought about the so what for them. But Jersey's different. Our sectors are different. Our threats are different. Our setup is different. Our customer base is different. All sorts. So we have to think about the so what for Jersey and the so what for an IFC. So I won't labor about who the FIU are, but we are an agency that every country should have that looks at the reporting of suspicion and then does something with that and moves it on. Now, I put this up because actually it's really important for me and you to understand that the FIU isn't what many people have labeled it as across the globe before, where it is a place to report SARS, they'll do a bit of work and they'll pass it on to law enforcement. It has to be more than that, and it should be more than that. But in so many jurisdictions, it hasn't been more than that. SARS are one thing, but we need lots of other information as well. No other intelligence capability in any jurisdiction will rely on one single source reporting element. They have to have a range of inputs at the front end to be able to understand. They then have to have a range of sources, in particular sort of the likes that Stephen has with KYC 360 and others, that are helping us to, and you, to understand what some of those other data points may or may not be. And that widest range of sources then helps us to corroborate information. And then we need to disseminate it. But all of that process is about analyzing and assessing information and doing it at an operational and a strategic level. It isn't just about providing the police with information so they can start an investigation. If we think that, we've failed before we've started. But unfortunately, many FIUs have thought that over a long period of time. And as sort of Stephen alluded to at the beginning, I've sat sort of at the top of banking, both with some global banks and also with the Wolfsberg Group. And I have been, frankly, disappointed in what FIUs have done in the past, which is why I sort of came back into the public sector, because there's an opportunity. And now is the time for change on these things. And that's sort of over this last year what we've been seeking to think about and do. So the what here, what I expected and what I got were probably different things when I first came to Jersey. A weak understanding of what is intelligence, really critical sort of word for me and my career, and also what an FIU does. But there are different interpretations as to what intelligence is, and we have to sort of tackle that. The domestic versus international focuses, the power of the community, whether businesses are just focused on rulebook compliance, or actually whether they really are thinking about the risk and the indirect risk and really understanding and knowing their customers. And I don't want to sort of disable business, of course. We've got to enable business. And that's something that the FIU has to think about. Only with a business brain can we think about the challenges that you necessarily have. But that becomes important. And where we are with the threat actors and the broader global situation, threats are evolving all over. I took a note of a few statistics just before coming on. Those threats are not going away. And it's a profitable situation for criminals. 98.9% of criminal profits in the European Union were not confiscated or tackled, Europol figures. The UNODC figures, less than 1% of all criminal assets are seized or frozen. It paints a really stark picture. This is happening. Whether we want to believe it or not, this is happening all over. And it's not just the criminals. We're now moving very fast into a place where proxies, where state threat actors, where others are then influencing and are engaging. And we, as a jurisdiction, our strategic focus is on the financial services sector. So therefore, influence, malign influence, criminal influence becomes really critical for us to understand. It costs. The figures that came out of the US a couple of years ago say that it costs Mexican drug cartels between 3 and 5% commission to launder money through a professional money launderer. China brought that figure down, like they always do, to 2% last year. But China have also, and Chinese organized crime and criminal crime gangs, through informal value transfer and capital flight, have brought down the cost of money laundering to 0%. It costs them nothing. So they're just legalizing a lot of assets that they are that they're criminally obtaining. And that's a really sort of frightening figure, I think. On the flip side, there's another frightening figure that we all sit in Jersey in a well-regulated, in a stable location. Transparency International did some numbers and said 36% of people thought that PEPs were a risk. Of course, PEPs get a bad sort of press, and lots of people think that they are a risk. In the same survey, they said that 36% of law enforcement were a risk. And again, that starts to show us that in lots of countries, law enforcement are as much about corruption because they're part of the state, and actually business is the safe place and is the trusted place, whereas in other jurisdictions, that sort of equation might flip over. But we have to think globally on all of these things. So during that sort of first year then, Moneyval, of course, and I'm sure George has talked this morning about it, as the black clouds of Moneyval sort of came when I first arrived, thinking very heavily about what was going to be the good, the bad, and the ugly in all sorts of ways. And we saw it, root and branch. It was really useful for me in my first year to see what was good, what was bad, and what was ugly across all of the agencies. And that really helped me to sort of reshape things and take us in a slightly different direction. And of course, in the end, Moneyval was all about sort of the Magnificent Seven, and actually it was a success story, and a lot of that success should be sort of reflected to George and the team, because there was significant work done, and we presented ourselves very well. And it gave us a position. Now, people might not believe in Moneyval or FATF standards, but they are the only international standards, so we have to think about them, and we have to take that forward. Jurisdictionally, we've got the HLAP, the High Level Action Plan, that is sort of links into where we go next steps. And the FIU is, of course, has plenty of recommended actions that fall out of that. And in this year, I've thought about that a lot. There were no surprises. There were lots of gaps because we're in transformation and transition. There's a lot of focus back to you as industry because, as I said at the beginning, I have to seek to inform you, to help you, to work with you, and to get better from you so that we understand the threats and we can drive things in the right direction. So my high-level action plan is actually as much about industry as it is about the FIU. The other bits when I first turned up as to what I expected and necessarily what I got, as a washed-up old drunk, I was very happy to think that I might be sort of driving around on the beaches of Jersey and pleasant bays. But of course, that isn't Jersey. And what I actually got was a massive amount of complex understanding of shell structures and company structure pieces. I had, rather than being in Jersey, I tended to be abroad sort of an awful lot more, engaging with the likes of Interpol or the US Embassy and others. The foreign travel out of Jersey seems to be much more apparent than anywhere else. But of course, when you think about it, as an IFC, of course we have lots of international touch points. And of course, as the head of an FIU, we have to engage across the piece because we're one piece of the jigsaw within the bigger picture. And of course, there's a massive amount of complexity that we have to understand as an FIU as well. You have to understand as an industry, but we have to understand it across all of your sectors and across all of your business areas. And that is challenging for our staff, especially staff in transition. And it ultimately means that we're all interpreting things that might look the same, but in a very different way. And that's something that I've sort of wrestled with over the last year and 18 months. This sort of picture came from a machine learning and an AI representation at one point as to how do you teach something. But it does reflect to me that we'll all look at the same sort of image and we'll come up with very different ideas, dependent on the lens that we're looking through, depending on the angle that we're looking at it, depends on how big that picture necessarily is that we're engaging in. So interpretations, especially as an intelligencer, are something that we've reflected on. But of course, the biggest reflection is about our change, and not just our change for our benefit. Like I said, this is change for the jurisdiction's benefit, and this is change for the international stage that we sit on, the benefit there. But alongside change becomes the reluctance to change. And people don't like change, of course, because it starts to impact them. There are so many challenges with change that I'm sure you're all sort of certainly familiar with, that we are having to unpick everything to re-establish sort of necessarily where we are. And that's challenging as an FIU when you've come from being a subunit of a unit in a police force that has its own particular sort of ideology and takes intelligence to support an investigation, and that's its aim. That's not what we are. That's not what an FIU should do, and that's not what the standards say an FIU should do. So trying to change that when a lot of the other competent authorities have been used to that over 15 years is really challenging at times. But change sort of for us started very much with who we are and our sort of brand and marketing piece. And we have to coalesce behind a particular banner and a particular sort of organization. And so we are independent. If I could see everybody in the room, I might sort of ask you to put up your hands, but I can't because of the lights. It's to say, who thinks that the FIU are part of the police? Or who thinks that the FIU are part of the regulator or something else? The FIU are none of those. We are independent, and we should be independent. And that becomes really important, that we stand and sit on exactly the same table as the Attorney General, Chief of Police, the head of the Commission, and myself and government on all things financial crime. That is sort of the political steering group level, and that becomes really critical, that we have a voice there, and that we understand the threat, we understand that sort of focal point, and we're not just a support tool to others. So this year, when we've sort of thought about it and reflecting on it, it has been a lot about how we get better technology and sources, how we grow the knowledge of our people, and we think about the future FIU and where that knowledge is coming from, and how we're structured to be able to deliver the right outputs. What those outputs actually look like. What is our product suite? What are our processes to get to that product sort of suite? And ensure that we're providing valuable insight to everybody. And we only do that by collaboration and partnerships, not only with you, but internationally as well, to drive things forward and to think the so what for an IFC and the so what for Jersey. But going back to the branding piece, everything we do has to be landed appropriately. Life and even the FIU is a marketing operation. Intelligence is a marketing operation in so many ways. We have to come up with an idea and sell it so that somebody's going to take some action from it. If we don't come up with a convincing idea with convincing sources, then nobody's going to action anything off the back of it. So where are we going then with all of this? Ultimately, as I said, we're an asset for the jurisdiction and for the other agencies and for industry and wider. We have to think about the threat much more. We have to be sort of much more aware as to what the sort of defense and attack oppositions are, not just reacting to something that has happened already and is not even the low-hanging fruit that Stephen referred to earlier. It's the fruit that's fallen on the floor and is rotting. It's happened, it's gone, it's past. We're not even learning lessons from it. We need to get ahead of the threat. We need to be able to think, how does intelligence work there? International versus domestic, and this whole piece about intelligence versus investigation. Intelligence isn't investigation. It's a totally different skill set with totally different ideology, totally different sort of thoughts. They perhaps work together at times, but intelligence assessment, intelligence analysis is not investigation, which is generally for an evidential purpose. We don't have to find evidence. We just have to find reasons why we believe something is happening. That's for somebody else to find the evidence for it and to seek the prosecution. But to the point earlier, we're never going to prosecute or investigate our way out of financial crime. We need to understand the threat first to be able to understand what are the controls and mitigations. So we've thought a lot about that in this sort of first year. And technology and relationships and others all drive into how we necessarily do that. So when I first turned up, we probably sort of had an engagement with the sort of the group of people that are blue on this sort of slide. So the Jersey authorities, and perhaps the sort of the grey ones as well. Since then, we have grown enormously in terms of who we're engaging with, the different scale and size of those things sort of across the piece, and why we should engage. We have to think much, much wider, and we have to do that across the different domains of tactical, operational, and strategic insight. But we have to do that with you, and I don't quite like this sort of slide particularly, but it's supposed to demonstrate that the FIU should be engaging with all of you sort of in industry, as well as all of the local competent authorities. Then we have to engage with lots of different partners. And the reasons why at the bottom of that, sort of who are these different partners, we've got sort of the security service and the Al-Qaeda flag, the largest terrorist organization, was that those of you who might have been at our launch event earlier this year might have noticed that at the front end of that, Lord Jonathan Evans, former head of MI5, was sort of sat at the front of it, professional intelligencer. That's what the FIU should be. And at the back end, we had Ayman Dean, who was a former MI6 agent, covert agent, with Al-Qaeda, and sat with Osama bin Laden and numerous sort of others within the Al-Qaeda setup, both from sort of Bosnia, Chechnya, and in Afghanistan itself. But we get insight from Ayman and from others, because it's only by understanding that threat picture across the way do we actually understand. Ayman came in and he spent a day with us before the presentation and changed our attitude towards what terrorist financing was, because of course he's lived it, he's breathed it. He's also part of the sort of Islamic and the Muslim culture. He also understands what Iran is doing and the difference between Shia and Sunni Muslims, and how their different sort of methodologies and procurement chains and sort of donations and other things work. That becomes really powerful. A World Bank methodology doesn't go into that type of detail. So we need to talk to these people, otherwise we don't understand. We think that we understand, but we don't understand. So this sort of reflection starts to sort of understand that threat. We're not even prepared for it, and you're not even prepared for it, because we're not helping you to make those better informed decisions. I know George sort of talked a little bit earlier about the public-private partnership that we've launched, and we're just about to expand that as well. So the JFIN, that's been a big thing about as we reflect on this year, is the importance of partnership, but also stabilizing that partnership and giving that partnership a clear position within the structure of the government's strategic approach to tackling financial crime. Like I said, this is about to sort of expand, and we've got a JFIN Bob, a business oversight board. We've got another banking JFIN, or another FIN, and then a trust and company service provider FIN that we want to sort of set up. They'll have a different focus, but this is the start point, and this is about understanding threats and working together to achieve that in lots of different ways. And that will also have lots of sort of useful literature, and literature that, again, might take somebody else's sort of thought process, but puts the so what to Jersey and the so what to an IFC. There's no point in having a great big long FATF report or a UK sort of NCA report about a particular subject that we all have to digest in some way. If we can do that work for you, along with government and the regulator, and say, it's a great bit of work, this is what it actually means, and the so what for Jersey is this, we'd expect you to think about these bits, job's done for you, and it makes your life a lot easier rather than trying to do everything, but only 2 or 3 of those things actually becoming relevant and pertinent. Another bit that we've sort of reflected on is that we needed to move out of the police station. We're not the police. The police have been great tenants for us. They've been great, landlord, we've been the tenants. They've been very accommodating, but they create challenges and limitations. So we are just about to move by the end of the year, with limitations as to where we could move because of the level of information that we necessarily get and elsewhere. But we will be moving to Maritime House, and we will take over our own whole floor. We'll have our own training suite that we can start to do things with industry more, and we can start to engage and have much more sort of, within certain parameters, an open door context with you and an engagement approach with you. And that's predicated on our move, which brings in new technology. So you will see that the IFIS and the SAR portal that you've been used to will go at some point next year, and GoAML, which is a UNODC platform, will come in, and we'll start to work with industry as to how that might impact you and how that goes forward. But of course, when we reflect on the year, there's an awful lot that sort of has to be planned around that and thought about that. And the likes of sort of Richard here at the front has been sort of integral to trying to unpick some of those challenges, with many more to come as well. You'll see that we now, if you did see it, new look annual report. We're starting on our com side to get consistency on sort of where you find stuff from. So we've got sort of the SAR reports, the annual report and others. You just have to change the numbers at the end and you'll start to sort of find it. We want to make things accessible and useful for you. We have to have a standing start, but we move therefore forward on it. And we'll start to think about the commentary that we necessarily put in there. But when will it ever end? And of course it won't ever end because of those figures that I just sort of gave you as to how large financial crime is across the space and how much that is necessarily growing. We don't understand half the threats, not even a quarter, not even 10% of the threats that we necessarily face. So that becomes a central focus. If we understand the threats, we can start to put controls, mitigations, and make it harder for the opposition to do their bits. But those threats are always developing as well. So we need to be agile with how we do that and think about how that evolution works. And also, as we said before, about the convergence of that threat that moves together. Criminals are always 1, 2, 3, 100 steps ahead of us. And that becomes the challenge because we think that we're doing the right thing. We think we're sticking to a compliance rule book. We think that we understand the risks and the threats, but actually we don't. We're just working within an exercise that is enabling business, which is great, but we want to enable safe business and business that we're not sort of caught with our pants down around. Just sort of lastly, sort of closing off, I suppose, is the why. So those of you who can speak Latin, manu idat cognitio vires, is knowledge gives strength to the arm. That was sort of the motto of the intelligence corps, of where I had my initial intelligence training. And it becomes really important because without knowledge, we're all disabled to be able to do something. Having knowledge allows us to make better informed decisions, and having insightful knowledge becomes really sort of powerful. We also have to think sort of further down there, are we tackling financial crime, or are we actually sort of thinking about how we defend the jurisdiction or provide safeguards? As an intelligence capability, we should think about both, but I think we should be thinking about the latter rather than the former. The threat actors are not just about crime. We cannot prosecute our way out of financial crime. If it's only about when a crime happens, all of this malign intent, all of this activity that hostile state threat actors and the world that we're about to enter or have already entered starts to sort of change. When you compare the cyber defense, the cyber security and cyber intelligence world with the financial crime intelligence world, one was drawn out of law enforcement and the police, the other was drawn out of the military and business and national security pieces. They think about defense, they think about mitigation, they think about developing understanding of the threat, because that then allows you, ultimately, if you have to investigate it, but you've put in all of the controls. On the financial crime side, we've very much sat in a crime must have happened here for us to be interested. And if it hasn't, we'll close it and move on. There's a real danger there, but many FIUs are starting to change, and in our reflection on the year, that's what we've understood globally, that many FIUs are changing into this space and are understanding it very differently. And of course, the problem of being an FIU or an intelligence sort of piece is that you have to be aware of security. The other day, this was sort of plonked in front of us, not the General Melchett picture, but the thing on the other side, which was supposedly a letter from me at the bottom, taken off of LinkedIn, with the UK Financial Intelligence Unit's insignia and other bits and pieces, trying to drive somebody in America some action for them to engage, that they were going to get some money out of it. They contacted us and gave us sort of the full-ish behind all of the other stuff that had necessarily been going on. The challenge there, I suppose, is that we all need to be alive to that security. The threat actors are out there trying to understand us, trying to manipulate us, either for their own profit or for some other intent. So be alive to that, most definitely. And just finally then, is turning it back sort of round to you, as we've thought about this reflections on this last year, and we've thought about the so what to Jersey, it is all about you. It's all about the industry. you have to be involved and you have to be critical partners. We have to share more. We have to do more together. We have to be better for you. We have to provide you with more stuff so that you understand that. But we can only do that if you start to talk to us and engage with us more to say what it is that where your gaps are or how you do want to understand things. There's a reality that change is going to be constant, and your changing approach and attitude as to who the FIU is the one thing I ask for you to embrace as we go forward into next year. Because the FIU has changed, it will continue to change, but that change needs to be to your benefit, most definitely. Anyway, I'll pause there and I'll sit down.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Jonathan. Very, very illuminating. You emphasized independence. Could you please explain to this audience and to the live stream audience who might not quite have the appreciation of this, why that is so critical for an FIU?
Absolutely. So independent decision-making is wholly necessary for an FIU. Previously, we sat sort of as a law enforcement capability with the priorities of the domestic law enforcement agency. You do, because that's your sort of your parent, as it were. By becoming independent, we make up our own priorities based upon discussions with others, but considering how the IFC is situated, what government has understood and agencies have understood through national risk assessments, and what is happening both in the industry and also internationally. So it becomes an absolute given that if I don't have independence to make those priorities, I'm driven into a space where I'm never going to tackle the threats at all. And I can't even understand what those threats are because somebody else is telling me you need to look over there. And I'm seeing the threat over there.
And that's particularly important for an offshore centre.
Yeah.
Because of the interconnectivity of what we're exposed to internationally. Yeah. And so our interests might not actually align completely with the interests of domestic law enforcement.
Yeah. Without a doubt. So I also chair something called the Quad Group of FIUs. So this is Jersey, Guernsey, Gibraltar, and the Isle of Man. Last week I was in Bern in Switzerland with MROS, the Swiss FIU, as well as the Luxembourg FIU and the Monaco FIU, talking about sort of the Quad. And I'd just sort of got our strategic analysts to do a bit of comparative assessment work against the jurisdictions as to their sector size, their non-resident sort of population sort of across the financial services industry, a whole range of about sort of 15 questions that could compare. Because we needed to understand ourselves as what made us the same and what made us different. We were in a very happy dialogue with one another. We're very happy to speak to one another and we can share different things. But of course, the presumptions as to what we are and where we're the same and where we're different are different to the reality as to what the figures and the statistics and the data shows. It was a really powerful morning when we sort of talked about it and presented it, so much so that the European IFCs were also really heavily interested and engaged, and I've been asked to do a similar exercise and focus across a number of other IFCs for the Egmont plenary next year. But it starts to demonstrate to me that some of these things FIU should have been doing for some time because they're an intelligence capability. And also as an IFC, if we're just one IFC, not that many people are interested in us other than the businesses. The big countries aren't. You put 4 IFCs together, you start to get a voice. You put 8 IFCs together, people start to sit up and look at what you're doing. You put 12 IFCs together, you're as big as a G20 nation, sort of in terms of the assets under management. And it's not that difficult to do. And that's sort of my direction of travel, is to try and work out where these connection points are, do things that are collaborative, but are also beneficial to all, that we get some consistency, and we understand that threat as to how IFCs are vulnerable in different areas.
Fascinating. Now, you alluded to the use of technology, and you've got the launch of Go AML, and that will obviously have consequential changes for industry, as you referred to. But are you able to give the audience a bit more of an insight, Jonathan, into the FIU's use of technology and data analytics to enhance its ability to gather intel effectively?
Yeah, definitely. We can't do anything without technology, is the reality. It's a massive force multiplier. The right technology with the right insight that gives us consistency, that gives us the clear data in an ordered and an appropriately sequenced way that can therefore be sort of structured and can be sort of checked and driven in different ways, becomes very, very powerful and beneficial, and some of sort of your tools are incredibly useful to us. And we position them within the FIU as to what are the different checks that are needed at different levels, not only to corroborate the SAR information that has come in, but of course the FIU has to have the widest range of sources available to it. And that might be closed sources, it might be open sources, it might be privileged sources, it could be sort of anything. It needs to be the widest range, so that you say something to us based upon a KYC 360 sort of check and some open source media and some your own KYC pieces. We need to bring that in. It's nonsense if we're just doing the same checks as you. We need to do both confirm what you're saying, but then go beyond that. That's sort of the level of a jurisdictional intelligence capability. And then we have the right insight from our people. So technology builds it all together and does the, when I think about the INT cycle, the intelligence cycle, you've got the direction, the collection, the analysis, and then the dissemination. Technology helps us massively in the research and the collection phase because it brings it all in together. It also helps us in the analysis and the assessment, which needs a joint human eye and a technology eye. Because if you can start to work out where the outliers and the anomalies are based upon the data sets, then you can start to understand where the threat is necessarily showing itself. It can also help when we start to do the dissemination piece and help to draw information together and present that appropriately so that we can demonstrate what it is that we do think is happening here. So at every stage, it is useful. And of course, if you then move back round to the direction phase, then if that is proactively identifying because you've got different screening tools, you've got different sort of risk identification tools, that's the trigger to then start the intelligence cycle sort of all over again. So technology underpins everything that we do. It is challenging because we have to sort of tie in with other national level, both here in the UK and elsewhere, intelligence sort of tools and capabilities. Technology is moving at such a fast pace that sort of government procurement efforts always leave us not only one, but two, but three, but four steps behind where we might like to be. But that's where the power of collaboration sort of comes in and the power of sort of joint sort of working and supporting one another.
Interesting. That knotty old issue of quality of SAR reporting, are you seeing the mean standard or level of SAR reporting increase? And either yes or no? And do you have any feedback for industry on how they could support you better through the quality of SAR reporting?
So when we move on to Go AML, there will be a different sort of SAR reporting requirement to some degree. Some of it might simplify, some of it might sort of become slightly wider. The more I help you to understand the threat, the more, the better the SARs are going to be. And so it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's better, not more, is what we're after. And that becomes sort of a whole sort of necessity of SARs. I think industry does a fair job in terms of that, and I absolutely acknowledge that not only simple feedback, which we start to give, but stronger feedback, clearer feedback is necessary. I was with the Wolfsberg Group last week in Switzerland, and one of their messages was feedback. And Alan Ketley, who's the executive secretary at the moment, said you don't go to school and not get feedback. You don't sort of go and do your sort of driving lessons and not get feedback. You don't do anything in life and not get feedback. Why do we submit SARs and we don't get feedback? It's a fair question that none of the FIUs could necessarily sort of answer. And then we hide around, well, there's sensitivities and we don't necessarily want to compromise an investigation. But of course, it goes back to my bit that every SAR isn't about an investigation. The SAR should be about the threat. And therefore, whatever happens to that is a subsequent sort of thought process. But I can surely mark you and give you some feedback as to how well you understand the threat, as to how you've written your SAR at all.
Fascinating. Does anybody else have any questions for Jonathan, please? Anybody? Yes, just here at the front. Sorry, there's a microphone there.
Ooh, we have a microphone now. Nice. I just had a question. It's quite a controversial one, a bit of a livener at this time of the afternoon.
Good, I like a controversial one.
You gave some fairly depressing statistics at the beginning of your talk, and Ruth also gave some depressing statistics about the activities of the NCA as far as prosecutions are concerned. So do we need a massive overhaul of the regulatory framework? Is it actually being effective? Sorry.
No, I think it's an absolutely fair question. And I don't think that the figures can tell you anything other than it's a failing system. However, we have the standards, FATF standards, money valve standards are there internationally. This isn't just a Jersey issue, this is a global international issue. The standards are there. We demonstrated that we could sort of broadly get above the line and get a very strong piece. And it's a reasonably low bar, to be frank with you. Many countries do not even get close to it. So when you are sort of have these interactions across the piece, and we're an international finance sector, that means we're reliant on so many others all of the time. Now, I go back to my points. We will not investigate and prosecute our way out of financial crime. It is too big. I really like the way that the Singaporeans have recently tackled their largest ever money laundering case, $3 billion. All of the people who were arrested have been sentenced, and the first ones are already being released. And this case only came about last August. The Singaporeans took the view that why do we need to wrap ourselves up in years upon years of investigations and trying to get evidence when ultimately the individuals are probably not the hierarchy in this organised crime capability. And if we can take the assets off them, and therefore we don't have to spend lots of money managing those assets over the next 4 or 5 years, but we can take those assets and move on and do what we want, well, we've hit them where it hurts. If we started to do more of that, I think there would be a slightly different sort of approach. I honestly think that understanding the landscape that we operate in is more critical than following investigations all of the time. Now, there's a deterrent effect, of course, on investigations, and everybody, if they've broken the law, should be prosecuted. But we know that many of the threat actors, the Russians, the Lebanese at the moment, they own their own banks. They know their way around the system. They've written their own compliance rule books, and they're running their own regulators. So thinking that that is going to stop financial crime, I think is a flawed ideal. Understanding the threat and working sort of collaboratively, I think, is an element that we need to do. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't align to regulatory standards, and that of course it has its place, and you've got to have a rule book to be able to align to. But just aligning to it doesn't necessarily stop financial crime.
Jonathan, we've run out of time,
Yep.
I'm afraid, but super interesting. I know how busy you are. I'm very grateful for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Enjoyed it.
Thank you.